capital funding towards projects. And I'm not going to get into the depths of detail that I would if we were doing a budget presentation. But we secured about $90 million in capital funding in FY24, bringing our total since I've been borough president, which I believe December 6th made my third year, to $220 million that we've allocated across the borough. $31 million this year is going into our schools. So even as we hear about these budget cuts, we know that there have historically been challenges and underfunding in public schools, in particular across Queens County historically. You know, one of the best parts of the job is being able to go back to places that I even went to school that faced historic disinvestment. You know, this year I walked into Jamaica High School and I met with several of the principals there. When I was there, it was just one principal, it was one school. But I was able to write a $3 million check, and I asked the principals to forgive me for my behavior my first 2 years attending that school. But really, you know, this year we are really focusing in and honing in on our high schools in particular, where we've seen just the pure disinvestment. You know, I walked in to August Martin High School, you know, their auditorium, their lunchroom, their gymnasium, you know, the technology that they were using was just inefficient. And we wanted to make sure that schools like that were prioritized this year. So $31 million going into our schools, that's the largest tranche of money we're putting into any one particular category this year, because our schools really need to see that investment. And we'll be making some announcements in the future on that. So stay tuned on where that money is being distributed this year. We put $20 million into parks, $14.4 million into healthcare, continuing to make sure we upgrade hospitals like Elmhurst Hospital, where we just cut the ribbon on 2 operational rooms. Seems like a small story, but really, when you think about the lack of investment that even these institutions have seen, we're continuing to invest in them. Next, we'll be doing their NICU, where sick babies who need to be cared for are kept and monitored. And when I walked into that facility last fiscal year, I said, we have to fix this. We want every single child born in Queens County, every resident of Queens County to have the most modern facilities possible. $7.5 million into our libraries, $7 million into our culturals. Matter of fact, we work very closely with the Queens Museum, and happy to say that we'll be building out a children's museum for the first time in Queens County. You might have heard me speak about that in the past, but we put about $7.5 million into that project as well. So, you know, I have this slogan, most of you know it, Queens get the money. We're going to continue to advocate and fight against any of these cuts coming down the line as well. You know, this morning we read the reports of cuts happening at college campuses, for instance, like Queens College. And, you know, these colleges are the gateway into the middle class. And we often talk about the diversity in our borough and opportunities in our borough. And these institutions provide a lot of opportunity and access, especially for even immigrant communities or underserved communities. So CUNY is a gateway for many of our young people looking to gain an education, to get a degree. We're going to fight those cuts, those draconian cuts that these institutions are facing head on. I want to talk about housing quick, and we definitely saw a slowdown in housing production this year opposed to last year. Last year, we signed off on nearly 13,000 units of housing across Queens County, and a large part of that was due to big projects like Innovation Queens. We had a lot of development still happening down in the Rockaways. You know, so we had some bigger ULURPs last year. But this year, we've only signed off on 3,665 units of housing this year. And I could tell you right now that with the pace of growth we're seeing, with the migrant crisis that we're facing, with 40,000 migrants living and staying in Queens County, that we need to move aggressively to address this issue. And next year, we specifically will be going to Albany. And I know there's been a lot of debate around the 421A tax break, and rightfully so. You know, the 421A tax break did not help us build affordable housing. The state needs to get back to the drawing board. really look at ways to refine the program, change the number, change the name of it for All I Care. But without 421A, even for the projects that we are approving, it's going to be relatively hard to get shovels in the ground based on the financial status the city's even facing, the crippling crisis around budget cuts that we are facing. HPD is not going to be able to finance these projects themselves. We're going to need state support, and that comes in lieu of having a tax break as well. So I'm going to highlight some projects, but we need to have every tool in the toolbox available to us to really build housing across the state. So once again, just looking at where we were, 13,000 units last year, opposed to only signing off on nearly 4,000 this year. So Willets Point, obviously phase one, we will break ground. If you haven't heard about it yet, you will get a release. I'm sure the mayor will be sending it out between today and tomorrow. But phase one of Willets Point, we will break ground on this upcoming Wednesday. With that being over 1,000 units of housing, including 220 senior units, 22,000 square feet of retail space, 5,000 square feet of community space, and 30,000 square feet of open space for a K-8 school with 650 seats. And what's unique about this is obviously we found the tools working with HPD, and we really worked extremely hard to make sure that we reached the lowest depths of affordability, which was a sticking point for us. Even though this project was technically negotiated before I became borough president, the first phase when EDC came to us, when the folks who wanted to build the stadium came to us, we were very clear that we wanted to see units set aside for homeless families, for what will be now formerly homeless families, but also those deep depths of affordability at 30% AMI. So as we move forward, even on the Willets Point phase two rezoning, which we just held a hearing on last week, there are a lot of sticking points for us, and we'll talk about that as we get further into the discussion. But what I will say is, even as we talk about phase two, we're going to want to see a plan that incorporates street vendors, and that's something we're very serious about. Most of you know about the battles we had at Corona Plaza, and one of the things we want to correct, moving through this next phase as the stadium is built, is making sure that we don't support or aid and abet these large stadium projects that come into communities that do very little to benefit them. Most of you have seen me talk about the US Open, and we're restarting conversations with them early next year, because these benefits have to reach the communities. The kids who are going to live in this neighborhood, the surrounding neighborhoods of Corona and Jackson Heights and East Elmhurst, deserve to touch the field the same way, right? They deserve for their feet to kick a soccer ball on the turf. We want to make sure that these concessionaire opportunities are there. And we also want to make sure that the affordability in the later phases also mirrors what we're doing in phase one. So we have reached a deal with the city, for instance, on the second part of Willets phase two, where we will see the SARA program incorporated, which is largely senior affordable housing, which is good. But in the latter phases, which will be decided later on, we want to ensure that those opportunities are there. So once again, just making sure that we correct that historic disinvestment in communities like Corona. And most of us have kept up with a lot of the quality of life issues facing Corona. And there are real challenges around human trafficking, around prostitution, around vending. And I sort of look at these things and tie them together. There's a nexus there, right? Have not seen a lot of growth in the economy up there. Have not seen growth and opportunities for concessionaire opportunities at the US Open or Citi Field to the degree we want them to support. Not to say Steve Cohen hasn't been supportive. Steve Cohen, at the height of the pandemic, when I sat down here, came up with millions of dollars to distribute to small businesses, but also did help us with a pilot for street vendors as well. But we don't want vending to just happen on our street. We want these folks to be able to grow their products and to really turn them into, larger businesses and big household names in the near future. I'm going to hop in next to the next project, which is Creedmoor, that we announced with the governor just 2 weeks ago, which is nearly 20 to 40 years in the making. And I'm very proud of what we've accomplished with the first proposal that we've laid out. If you look back at the history of Creedmoor, you should know that, first of all, we get to dust off these history books on Queens. Creedmoor started as a hotel. That's the crazy part about it. But we know what happened in the 70s and 80s when it came to really taking care of those in mental health crisis, how the drug companies came in, how you had the governors back then really push people out of this site, and they left it over 55 acres of this land historically undeveloped for over 20 years. When I sat down at this desk in 2021, I said, we're going to get this plan done. And I dusted off Claire Schulman's plans at the time. And at that time, I think when Claire was even pitching something on this site, she was looking at doing a campus for schools, and she got a lot of pushback from the local community. So we hear the local community, but one thing I've been clear on is that Queens has to be a part of the solution when it comes to the housing crisis. We're not going to play a zero-sum game. We want to hear from you, but we want to make sure that also this part of Eastern Queens, where you have 55 acres, there are not many places left in the city where you have 55 acres of land that sits dormant. So there's been a lot of false starts here, but we intend on making sure that those false starts turn into a reality here. In that plan, in the Creedmoor plan, it includes over 3,000 new homes, 55% of the units set aside for home ownership, which is really unique. And one of the things we're doing here is really tapping into state resources. I mean, we will approach HPD to perhaps be supportive with some of the senior housing, but this is something the governor is 100% committed to on the home ownership front. And when I'm talking about home ownership, also affordable home ownership. So really those opportunities for co-ops and condos and for folks to move from rentals and to really create upward mobility. And I think if you look at the stats, the startling facts of how home ownership is becoming more and more out of reach for the new generation, we have to fine tune this and restart this conversation, make sure there's subsidy available and programs available to help us and guide us into those opportunities. The other parts of the units, the other 1,200 plus units at this site would be rentals, with 800 reserved for supportive and senior, and 15% of the units set aside for veterans, which we have not done enough for our veterans in the city. You walk into any homeless shelter, you're going to find veterans there. And it's a shame that they come home after protecting us and they can't find a home, and they're protecting us at home. So we really wanted to start and solve for this issue as we talk about veterans homelessness in our city. The plan also includes 14 acres of open space, a new community center, a daycare, a school, and neighborhood retail. And this neighborhood is sorely under retail. We also are working with the MTA through the bus plan, the new iteration of the bus plan, to make sure that we have connectivity between the local bus and the LIRR connection, which would be a first for this neighborhood as well. So I look forward to this, and this is one of the things when we pitched the governor on our Queens Forward proposal. Creedmoor was on it, and I'm proud that we're accomplishing this. The next one, I'll just hit on the Rockaways quick, because the Rockaways continues to be one of the most successful rezonings that we did under the de Blasio administration prior to me taking the seat as borough president, and where I approved more than 10,000 units of housing across 3 different projects there. One Rockaway Village, which is about 1,800 units. I'm very proud of the work there, because you have 93% of the units. Last we got a check on the numbers, 93% of the units set aside in that development have gone to Rockaway residents. So as we talk about the need to make sure that we have a community preference, and I know that there's a lawsuit and the city will settle the lawsuit. A lot of times when we do these rezonings, what you hear from the local community is we see these new buildings coming up, we see these quality housing units coming up, we see new retail, but we can't get in. This is one of the few places in the city where when you go and you look at new units going up, new buildings going up, that Rockaway residents are gaining access. Once again, also with the 15% set aside for homeless families. So we've met formerly homeless families. We talked to many of those families who just love where they are living. Uh, the next project out there is Auburn East, which was over 100 acres of undeveloped land, which I approved that rezoning just a little bit before I became borough president. That is moving ahead. The community center is up. We now are putting in over $40 million in infrastructure to make sure that finally we address the longstanding challenges around infrastructure in the Rockaways as well. And I'm very proud of this, what will become of this new development, because I used to live across the street from it. My apartment, my affordable housing unit in Ocean Village, what is now known as Arvin View, faced this site. So I would literally look at this dump every single morning and say, when are we going to do something about it? And proudly got elected to the city council, started the conversation. And now, you know, as borough president, we are putting shovels in the ground here as we speak. So we anticipate, and once again, we're having conversations with the city on what does financing the first phase look like. But I just want to reiterate that 421A becomes another toolkit, another tool in the kit that we need to complete this project. So the new iteration of what that will look like is going to be critical in the success of building out over 2,200 units here. And then we have also what is known as Edgemere Commons, which is also, this site is abutting this site. We also have an opportunity to also build on the foundation there with over 2,000 units there. We also, through the rezoning, had secured a lot of different things, and will be next year, and you might have heard us negotiate with Mayor Adams on the latter end of this rezoning for a new health and hospital Gotham Center in the Rockaway. So that is moving ahead. It's fully funded, thanks to Mayor Adams. And we anticipate the lease to be signed for the city to run an H&H for the first time in the Rockaways. And one of the reasons we fought for this center was because during COVID, when I was in the council, it was very hard for us to get answers from the state. You know, they were very responsive to the state officials, to the federal officials, but we didn't have much city infrastructure in place. We all know that Rockaways is also a healthcare desert, so we're solving for that as well. And then also we'll be in the new year cutting the ribbon on the new Far Rockaway Library, which is about 100% complete. They're just scanning in all the books as we speak, and we anticipate that will open. And then we've worked with the governor on another $4.5 million, which came through her New York Forward plan, and we'll be announcing a myriad of different projects that will be funded through that. I want to just hit on the city of Yes, and if you keep getting my theme is housing, economic development, infrastructure, retail. So it's not just simply about building housing, it's how we building communities holistically. And that gets me to the city of Yes, in which, you know, I project that you will see a lot of community boards across Queens County turn this plan down. We are going to continue to work with the administration to make sure that this plan is shaped in a way, because we do have some large scale projects coming down the line. If you're unaware, we've started the Jamaica rezoning plan, which really does give us an opportunity to bring thousands upon thousands of units online. And whether the city of Yes proceeds, just as I talked about the governor's plan last year that failed, Queens is going to move forward because we are hell-bent on building. Regardless on whether these plans move forward or whatever iteration of these plans get watered down, or however they look at the end of the day, we have done a lot of the grunt work up front with communities to let them know we don't want to see these business corridors that have been historically disinvested in just sitting dormant. We don't want just smoke shops in our communities. In order for us to really attract new retailers, to provide more opportunities, to provide housing, we have to build up on low density business corridors across Queens County. So Jamaica is one of those first places in Southeast Queens, which in a lot of cases, on the outskirts of many of these communities, they're low density communities. These are your single 1 and 2 family homeowners, right? But at the end of the day, we have a housing crisis, as we've said to them, and we're going to proceed aggressively to make sure that our business corridors look better and that we keep up the pace of growth. The same goes for ADUs, which is going to be probably the most controversial part of the plan. I support ADUs, basement apartments in particular. Um, if you need any proof that Queens residents are supportive of it, you can look at the pilot that HPD just put out. The ADU pilot program had more than 1,300 applications go in. We outpaced any other borough when it came to bringing ADUs into compliance. And this was a conversation, even as we talk about the rain today and these storms coming in. Many of you recall when we had Hurricane Ida, the amount of deaths we had because these basements were not in compliance. They didn't have egress. They didn't have, the things that we need to make sure that we're keeping people safe. And let me just add on, with 40,000 migrants in Queens and a housing crisis, we are hearing a lot of them are bulking up in these basement apartments. They may be street vending, they're finding their way into construction, and then you have 10 or 15 people living in single family rooms or living in these basements. So we really need to do everything we can to bring these basements into compliance. And basements do have an opportunity, they do provide an opportunity for us to provide immediate housing to individuals. The other thing is, I like to remind some of the constituents who are anti the basement apartments is that people are already renting them out. I mean, any of us can Google basement apartments, where can I rent? And you're going to find them everywhere. So I think our obligation is to make sure that there are resources for homeowners to bring them into compliance and to also create these opportunities to provide immediate housing for families. I'll hit on unemployment quick. So when we took office at the height of the pandemic, unemployment was about 23%. Queens is now down to 5%. So we're making a lot of progress. And we've hit a lot of milestones. In particular, we can think about JFK, $20 billion of investment happening right now, 10,000 jobs coming online. 6,000 of those jobs are union jobs. 6,000 out of those 10,000 are union jobs. So we are working to make sure that every community, including those who need second chance opportunities, very proud of this program that they've launched at JFK, because normally if you have a criminal record or criminal background, you're not allowed to work on JFK grounds, technically, in a lot of the jobs. But this second chance opportunity program is providing those opportunities. And we've had to hit reset, obviously, when it coming out of the pandemic. But we just met with the young lady who's now in charge of that program, and we're looking to really ramp that up. But 10,000 jobs, 6,000 union jobs, huge opportunities. Also making sure that MWBE procurement opportunities are there and concessionaire opportunities are there for local residents has also been something we've been largely focused on. For instance, tomorrow at Terminal 4, you're going to have a holiday market proceed at JFK, one of the first of its kind, which will have local residents selling their goods at the airport. The idea at the end of the day, as we redevelop JFK, is not just to have them selling at the market, but to really have these concessionaire opportunities for them within the terminals. So that is something we are extremely serious about and fighting hard on. Matter of fact, we just graduated the first cohort of people who went through training on financing, how to finance, how to run a business. Right here at Borough Hall, we graduated, I think, close to 30 or 40 individuals who went through this. I believe it was an 8-week course to ensure that there's an opportunity for them at these terminals. And I will just add on the MWBE front, we have these goals, 30% minimum. We are holding people's feet to the fire. Terminal 6, which will be the new JetBlue terminal, was lagging behind. And we've pushed them extremely hard over the course of the last few weeks to get serious about these minority contracting opportunities as we move through this project. And we'll have some more updates on that in the near future. I want to move into tech quick. We've been doing a lot of work around tech. Most of you know that we traveled to Lagos, Nigeria, which is considered the Silicon Valley of Africa, to really learn about how are they ensuring that more people of color or how are they ensuring people of color are getting the tools they need, whether it's venture capital dollars for startups, how are they really fostering these opportunities for ownership in the space of tech? You've heard me talk about the startling facts around tech less than 12% of the tech industry is comprised of Black and brown folks. So we are looking to continue to correct that disparity here across Queens County by creating better pipelines between communities and jobs of tomorrow. Matter of fact, last year we hosted our first tech fair in Queens. We had over 600 individuals show up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday to get trained, to get connected to the industry. We're looking to host that again, I believe January 27th is the next one, where we'll have the Amazons and you know, all of the tech and a lot of our tech partners there. But we also are working on an initiative to build out a Black tech hub, which is largely modeled after places they're doing it like in Atlanta. We are looking to build out that here. We also did launch last year our first Queens in Tech Innovation Initiative, which provides seed money for startups. So last year we gave over $100,000, which we raised in private capital, to 5 winning local startups. And this year, again, we intend on, as we just kicked off the program a few months ago, and awarding another $100,000 for local startups as well. And the idea is for us to create our own Meta, to create our own, I don't want to call it X here, but you know, but to create enforcer opportunities for the next big and upcomer, but big up and coming tech startup right here out of Queens County. We know the talent is here. We need to make sure that we're forcing opportunity, and most importantly, making sure that access to capital is there for individuals. And we're working with City Hall on the larger Black Tech Hub piece as we speak. Corona Plaza, most of you have heard the updates on that. We're going to continue to look to ramp up there. You know, we are very pleased to reach an agreement with the administration on Corona Plaza. We want to see this program replicated in places like Jamaica, Flushing, as well as Roosevelt Avenue. And I look forward to continuing to work with Deputy Mayor Joshi on this, even once again, ramping up those numbers once we hit the 4-month period at Corona Plaza. I'll brush over migrants once again. Most of you know, Queens has more than 40,000 migrants in our care. Queens has always been a borough that has been more than 50% of our borough is comprised of individuals who are foreign born. So we are more than welcoming. My father, as always alluded to, just became a United States citizen in 2020. The first election he can vote in was mine. I hope he voted for me. But the bottom line is we do need DC to step up. We're going to continue to work with Senator Schumer and Minority Leader Jeffries, soon to, God willing, be Majority Leaders Jeffries on this, to push the Biden administration on this issue. And at the same time, we're going to still continue to fight off these cuts, because if Queens is seeing more than 40,000 migrants in our care, the administration, the Adams administration, needs to be sensitive to these cuts. We don't need less here. We're going to need more support here to make sure that we are supporting our newest neighbors. And I'll add, we just went into JFK. Most people don't know that JFK has a former post office that was converted into a place where migrants are kept. And we quietly went in 2 weeks ago with the OEM commissioner to get a better understanding of how they're servicing these individuals. You had over, I believe, 789 single men living in this hangar. You know, the city is doing the best it can, obviously under the conditions, but they're in the middle of the airport with nothing there. Yes, the MTA runs a bus every half an hour or so. But the bottom line is we're going to need to see these worker authorizations picked up. Venezuelans have got worker authorizations, but most people are unaware that we're seeing more people come in from Sudan, from Senegal. So even the question around language access for these individuals, they're just a myriad of challenges for them. So at one time, we were seeing a lot, once again, coming in from Venezuela through the border, but now we're seeing a big influx of Africans coming in, and language access is going to be key. We are ramping up TPS services here at our office. Most of you know, when I came in, I created the Immigrant Welcome Center here, partly because we were already getting calls from the border when I sat down and took the helm as the borough president. I'm going to just quickly touch on hate crimes and then crime stats, and then we will wrap up. And climate. On hate crimes, it is really a powder keg right now. You know, obviously I was in Israel 2 months ago. I mean, I went firsthand and saw the devastation at the kibbutz, had a lot of different conversations with different individuals with varying different degrees of opinions on this. There are two things that we can all say. Civilians, certainly, the loss of life. There are no winners in war. We are empathetic and sympathetic to the plight of our Palestinian brothers and sisters who are losing their lives innocently in Palestine, and we also feel for our brethren and sisters in Israel who also have lost their lives. I was in the kibbutz. I smelt the stench of death. We heard artillery fire. Matter of fact, while I was there, we had to run into a safe room at one point because Tel Aviv was under rocket fire while we were meeting with the equivalent of their Pentagon, their Defense Department, to get an update on what are the strategies they're utilizing to both protect civilians on both sides. So we've had a myriad of challenges around hate crimes across Queens County, and it's one of the reasons we've hosted roundtables with our Muslim leaders as well. Matter of fact, we were astounded to find out at that roundtable that I believe there were only like 2 Islamophobic hate crimes reported in parts of Queens. We know that number is much higher than what's being reported. And then we just last night, the Sikh community has also felt the sting of hate crimes like they did after 9/11. Last night we held a roundtable with the NYPD, the District Attorney's Office to Prevent Hate Crimes, which I was proud to sponsor the legislation on in the City Council, with the Sikh community last night at the Sikh Cultural Society Center to ensure that they know what resources are available to them. And what's happening on the street, what's happening at dinner tables is certainly impacting our schools as well. So Hillcrest High School, most of you heard of the incident. We're doing a lot of work with them internally, and we're going to have more to say on some strategies that need to really happen across all school bodies right now. Right now, the Department of Education's policies have sort of stymied any conversation within school campuses based on guidelines that were put out. I know the chancellor's looking to correct that, but there needs to be healthy dialogue within the school bodies so that we don't see kids acting out of ignorance, right, on their campuses. So we're working with the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes. Once again, I founded that for a reason, because we need to do a lot more education. Our hate crimes task force continues to meet. We just met with college campus leaders last week as well, because we want to make sure that any campuses in Queens, our students, scholars can roam free of fear, no matter who they worship, no matter what they look like, no matter who they love. I will just announce these startling numbers, though. In Queens North, we've seen a 22% increase in hate crimes this year. And in Queens South, we've seen a 65% increase. So there were 62 anti-Semitic hate crimes across the city in November alone, up 32% from November 2022. So a lot of work to be done over the course of the next year. We're going to be holding a potluck with interfaith leaders right here at our office in January. And we're just trying to do the work to get ahead of this, to bring people together continuously to really break down those silos during a time of challenge. I'll just briefly run through crime stats because, historically, places like Queens South have always got the title of having the most shootings. This year, we've saw a 52% drop in murders in South Queens, 49% drop in shooting victims, and a 48% drop in shootings overall. And I think, why are these numbers coming down? Obviously, law enforcement does have a role to play, but those investments in better schools, better libraries, community spaces, housing, the job opportunities we keep talking about at JFK Airport, which is in our backyard, has really fostered opportunities for our local residents. And there's a direct correlation you can see with those investments, right? And we'll have a lot more of that as we move in, even the way we use our own discretionary and capital money. I'm going to hit on community. In Queens North, crime is up 5%, but down 26% in murders and 11% in shooting victims. There's a lot of gang activity happening up north right now, and that's something we are working with the administration on. For instance, we're going to want to see an expansion of the crisis management system in places like Corona. And then we're obviously working with our law enforcement partners up there as well. And the 116th precinct is coming online in the South. It's on schedule, and we look forward to opening that up, I believe, next year as well. In terms of community boards, we're going to be launching our community board applications on January 3rd. Half of our appointees this year were 45 years old or younger. For example, while 22% were Black and 20% were Latino. So we're continuing to plug away at the diversity challenges we've had on community boards. By no means are we done yet. We have a lot of work to make sure that we correct disparities in some of the boards that still exist. I know term limits will eventually kick in on community boards, something I was proud to support in the city council. That will help speed it up a lot more. Obviously, we can't remove people from community boards based on race, but we're being very cognizant of who we put in, working with the city council as well, being that they get to recommend 50% of the appointees to community boards to ensure that we really are addressing those historic disparities. So still a lot more to be done there, but proud of the work we've done. I'm going to end on climate and traffic quick. We continue to plug away on infrastructure. Most of you know, at one point, I chaired the Environmental Protection Committee of the City Council. We secured $2.5 billion from the de Blasio administration. That work continues with the Adams administration and plugging away at the historic infrastructure challenges we've had in South Queens. And even on a day like this, you will see that even with the slightest hint of rain, in places like Rosedale, where we would have saw basements underwater, they're not underwater because infrastructure was put in place. So we know there's a direct correlation. Put in the infrastructure, improve the roads, put in the bioswales, the green infrastructure in gray, and you won't have flooding even with minor storms. We'll continue to work with DEP and DDC, and we just did a briefing with DEP just 2 or 3 weeks ago on Peck Avenue in Flushing. Most of you remember the loss of life that occurred there during Hurricane Ida. And we will be coming back. So they brought on people to study. They did present some solutions to us on this issue. And we'll continue to work with them. And we're continuing to push the Army Corps to speed up the timeline of their flooding plan, because that is going to be key in addressing the coastal communities, especially during high tide on a day like this. The Rockaways, Hamilton Beach, Howard Beach, certainly Broad Channel. I'm proud of what we've done on climate this year as well. So we continue to put in the gray and green infrastructure. But Queens this year led the city in solar installations. 2,700 solar panels were installed in Queens, generating more than 170 megawatts of power. And that's just projects that receive state funding. So it shows that our strategies are working. And I was also the author, most of you know, if you don't know, now you know, of the Green Roofs Bill in the city council as well, which mandates any developers who are coming into the city for rezoning, who build, or anyone building a building 25,000 square feet and up, they are mandated to put on solar panels or green roof or a wind turbine, or to paint their roof white. So we see it happening every time developers come in and they have to go through a ULIP, and they come in here and they say, hey, we're presenting a great plan to you. We're going to put in solar, by the way. Yes, you are, because it's the law. We also broke ground on the Champlain Hudson Express converter station in Astoria this fall with the governor. When that line opens up, it will power over 1 million homes here with hydroelectricity. And then we also are turning the Ravenswood generating station into a clean energy facility as well. I know we've heard a lot of concerns around local law 97, but I'm happy to say that a lot of Queens is in compliance, and we're continuing to work with DEP in those areas where people would be deemed not compliant. We'll be hosting we did hold a climate expo to give information this past September to tenants and landlords as well. We'll continue to do that. I'm going to end on traffic. We just formed the Conduit Avenue Task Force. Most of you know about the dangers of what that happened on Queens Boulevard. Happy to say that we just got some federal money for Queens Boulevard, but the south and north conduits are extremely dangerous as well. So we formed a task force with Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso, because the conduit spans both Brooklyn and Queens. And we want to really make this the boulevard of zero deaths as well. moving into the future. We also are encouraged with the latest iteration of the MTA bus redesign. However, we still have a long way to go in getting it right. We have a commitment from the MTA to work with our office line by line. And it's not going to be a perfectly perfect, it's going to be an imperfectly perfect plan at the end of the day. But the idea is to make sure that we really are seeing connectivity in places that we historically haven't. We're continuing to work with the governor on the IBX, the Interborough Express as well, moving on to the new light rail proposal that will span from Bay Ridge into Jackson Heights. And then for those of you who've covered the Jamaica terminal issue, we've reached an agreement with the MTA and the developers who will be developing housing on the former, now what will be known as the former Jamaica terminal, with a new terminal now, which will be fully electric as well. So that agreement we just reached with all parties. Very proud of the work that this administration did working with our elected partners, in particular State Senator Leroy Comrie, to really ensure that residents of Southeast Queens finally get a state-of-the-art terminal. So there's a lot more that can be said here. There was a lot that was said. I went on and on and on. I really want to thank you all for the work that you've done, and once again, covering and highlighting a lot of these stories. I want you to know when you write, it enables us to advocate as well. The street vendors conversation certainly is an example of that. And I'm just proud that these individuals before Christmas, before the new year, before whatever holidays they celebrate, are now back at work. So journalism is democracy at its best. And we really appreciate all of you for highlighting many of the things that we talked about today, and look forward to working with you in 2024. With that being said, I'll turn it over to Chris for questions.
Okay, we've got a couple. We're going to start with Andrew Lee from Hudson River Blue. Andrew, I'm going to promote you really quick, and then you can ask your question.
Hi, Mr. Borough President. Thank you for taking the time. So I cover NYCFC, so my question is related to Willits Point, and it's a two-parter. So one, do you have any update to share regarding your recommendation on the proposals for phase 2 in terms of like if you're close to making one, or if you have plans to hold more talks with the stakeholders before, so making it maybe stretch up to that January 10th deadline? And then two, so at your hearing last week, you spoke a lot about, and just now actually before in your opening statement, you talked a lot about the need for the community to benefit from both the stadium and the overall development. And also mentioned wanting to repeat the mistakes made in the past with other stadiums in Queens. So have you gotten any kind of firmer commitments from the developers or the soccer team on what you've been asking for around like local hiring and incorporating the local food vendors and just community access to the stadium? And then how do you balance those like sort of requests against the need that you mentioned also in terms of like aggressively increasing the housing inventory in the borough, given that the phase 2 also has, 1,400 units of affordable housing? So just if you could talk about that, I guess.
Yeah, so yeah, great question. So we are continuing talks with them. I am not at a period of yes. I'm not at a yes vote yet, but I'm hopeful that a lot of the things we've requested from them by the deadline will be met. I think that they did give commitments at the hearing last week on the local hiring piece. I think we've all agreed that there needs to be opportunities for vendors. So there has been no pushback on either one of these proposals. We just want to see everything in writing. If it's not in writing, it's not real. So Vicky, I don't know if you want to just talk to some of the things that we've laid out, housing director, land use director, but everything we talked about in the hearing, nothing was new to them. I mean, we've been talking to them for over a year on many of the very commitments that we brought up at the hearing. And these are standard things. Any developer who comes into Borough Hall, and people consider Borough Hall advisory because we're the borough president. But no, we do have influence. And a lot of times, as they found out, they may need to come to us to demap a street. We're the only person who could demap a street. And I do believe that, we work with, for instance, we've worked with related companies on other supportive affordable housing projects. The Harriet Tubman building comes to mind in Far Rockaway that we did in conjunction with them and Christine Quinn's organization, WIN. for formerly homeless women now who are veterans with children. Fantastic project. So I don't think these developers are unaware of where we are coming from. Every developer who comes in here gets asked the same questions. Where are you at on local hiring? Where are you at on MWBE procurement? What does community facility look like for the local residents? So we're continuing conversations, and we're going to be regrouping with the stakeholders, and we hope to have this stuff wrapped. I mean, I would have loved to have it wrapped up before Christmas, but certainly we hope to have everything wrapped up before January 10th. Did I answer all your questions?
Yes, thank you so
And
much.
I think I saw somebody had a question. Vicky, can you just
So-
clarify the affordability levels in phase 1?
Vicky is not on this
Oh,
call,
she's not
Pete,
on.
but we can get that information over.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. The next question is going to be from Aria from Gothamus, who's actually she wanted me to read them. She's in a noisy place right now. It's a couple-parter. One, what are the affordability levels for the affordable housing project in phase 1 of Wills Point? And can you clarify what the 30,000 square feet of open space will be, just for the school or something else? And lastly, can you provide any more information about your recommendation to come on phase 2 of the project?
Yeah, so and I'll let Vicky get you the exact numbers. I don't, let me see. Oh, actually, over on phase, I do have the numbers in front of me. So on phase 1, 1,000 units. You know what? Let me make sure she gets you the exact numbers on it. But one of the things I'll say is that it skews from formerly homeless to about 120% AMI the most. More than half of the units on phase 1, and we're going to be out there Wednesday, so we'll be breaking ground on it. But Vicky will get you the exact numbers because I don't have them in front of me. But more than half of those the units on phase 1 will be 80% and under. A nice skew on a 30% AMI once again. We hit we wanted a diversity of incomes on the sites. I think we accomplished that based on the tools we have with HPD. So Vicky will definitely get you that. On the community facility side, 22,000 square feet of retail space, 5,000 feet of community space, 30,000 feet of open space, which will include the school. I mean, they will also, and we've been working with them on a larger plan to make sure that they incorporate more features when it comes to open space, whether that's rooftops, but really the conflict is really making sure that we also are successful and building out the affordable housing that we want to see on the site. We know that this site continues to provide a lot of opportunities for us to also solve for some of the affordable housing challenges that we have as well. Then on phase 2, they've come back to us with the senior units, which would be about, I think it's about the first building is about 220 odd units. So they would use the SARA program. On the phases after that, and that will largely be something we put in our recommendations, we're going to want to see in the latter phases, the units mirrored after phase 1, which we'll be breaking ground on Wednesday. So we're going to want to see it comparable. We've got some soft agreements, but we can't actually say that it's solid until we see the financing tools that HPD will offer. And so that's why I keep going back to the conversation around 421A, because that gives us more tools in the toolkit to really solve for some of the housing challenges that we have in financing the units. Because remember, these units will be permanently affordable, right? They're permanently affordable. So we're going to be paying for this, taxpayers will be paying for it forever. And we don't want to just create market rate housing. You know, we know when we did mandatory inclusionary housing, for instance, the market helps to subsidize whatever market rate units helps to subsidize and offset the units for the homeless and for those who are low income. So we need more tools because that allows us to even move some of those market rate units out of the queue of being market rate units and further down into the deepest depths of affordability.
All right. Thanks, Pete. We'll move on to Taya from the Daily News. I will promote you to a panelist and you can ask your question. Okay, you can unmute and go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the current status of Innovation QNS. I know it was approved a year ago, but there seems to have been little movement because of 421A. So if you could just give any sort of update on what's going on there and what next steps are, and what, if anything, can get done without 421A.
We're being very creative with how at least we're trying to get the first phase financed. So right now the discussions really revolve around, and we are looking for state assistance here. Actually, I got a call into the governor's office on this perhaps today as well. But we are looking at fostering a lot of different strategies, like how do we tie vouchers to some of the units very early on. So that's really where the conversations are right now. They are heating up on trying to get something done like by first quarter, like have something on the financing side done by first quarter. Those kind of conversations are actually continuing as we talk. But I do think we found an avenue working with HPD in the state to be creative. And I think the strategy is to get the affordable units done up front. So that's where we're at right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Next, we're going to go to Naisha, who put a question in the chat. Naisha from the Queens Chronicle. What will be done to address sewer and traffic issues at Creedmoor?
So right now, the EIS, the environmental impact statement for Creedmoor, will start sometime, I'm assuming they're going to award it to some firm or whatever early next year. So right now, last week or 2 weeks, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I can't even keep up now. Sorry, did like 10 events Saturday. But we anticipate the EIS will tell us what's needed there. But once again, the governor's fully committed to getting this done with state resources, which is not something we see every day. Maybe we see it with Gowanus, right? And as there's been some state and city synergy there. We anticipate we'll see that here. So those conversations are ongoing, but nothing is going to get built without storm sewers. I mean, and the EIS will largely help us determine what and how much infrastructure we'll need there. And we know this site hasn't been touched for over 20, 30 years. I mean, even when we talk about asbestos, right? There's going to be a large, even to put a shovel in the ground for the first set of 200 units, we're going to need to make sure that their cleanup is done, in a big way as well. So those conversations will continue through the EIS. I think when you look at the plan, you'll see that they did provide, being that this is a transit desert, a lot of opportunities for parking, but the idea, parking your car, but the idea is to make sure that the bus redesign plan also connects here, and that we really, with the city ticket, which is something my former colleague, Councilmember Danique Miller and I worked on along with State Senator Comrie, that we really are moving people into the LIRR as much as we can. I mean, it's a discounted ride. If you're driving into Manhattan from Eastern Queens right now, you're spending an hour and a half driving. If you're driving into Manhattan, all right? So you can literally cut that commute by almost 40 to 50 minutes by getting on the LIRR. It's like a half an hour, 40 minutes the most to probably get into Manhattan from there. I mean, being that I live even further. I live in Laurelton. I mean, it would take me 40, 50 minutes the most to get into City Hall if I took the LIRR and then obviously transferred and hope that the subways were actually running. So on the day that I would come into City Hall. So the idea is to make sure that LIRR is maximized, that the city ticket is there. Because in a perfect world, we would build out the subway system further into Eastern Queens. God willing it to be done in somebody's lifetime. It probably won't be done in my lifetime. But I think there's an opportunity to really make sure that the LIRR is running more efficient, that connectivity to the LIRR is there. And then also express bus service is something that you're going to see us push heavily on in this plan for Southern Queens and Eastern Queens. We don't want the MTA just to tell us, well, we're refining the plans and then not adding money in for additional service. So we know right now the MTA is investing $30 million into the bus network. To me, that's a base. We have a lot more work to do to get that number up. And I don't have a number right now. We're working with the union. We're working with our stakeholders on their lines right now. But we hope that number increases, because the plan should not be about we're cutting bus stops to speed up the buses. Yes, some of these bus stops, are close, maybe one block apart. That makes a lot of sense. But we want to be sensitive and not just saying, we're improving service by cutting bus stops. We need to see more investment in the system for more frequent service. Right now, there's a lack of confidence. If you have to stand at the bus stop for 15 minutes from Eastern Queens or Southern Queens, you're gonna drive. I mean, and with congestion pricing, as much as we think that it will get people out of cars, it will cut some congestion. As long as you have 4 higher vehicles out there, you ain't cutting that much. But secondly, you're still gonna have these residents who are driving in because it's more comfortable for them. And they could actually get to work on time driving in. So I think we have a lot of work to do with the MTA on their plan.
All right, thanks, Pete. Next, we're gonna go to Ben Max. Ben, I'm gonna promote you right now. All right, you can unmute.
Hello, Borough President. How are you?
Hello, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Good to talk with you. 2 questions. More importantly of the two, you mentioned the City of Yes for housing opportunity and expecting some pushback from the community boards. Will you say a little bit about your initial view of that proposal and, you know, sort of how you might be trying to shape the conversation in Queens around it? And then secondly, if you have time, I know you mentioned Queens Forward again. I'm just curious for you to sort of give an overview of where that's at and sort of what it is exactly at this point, and what, you know, what pieces of it might be upcoming.
Yeah. So so on the first piece, we created this I created a civic engagement task force when I became borough president. So we have over 130 civic leaders who actually attend this meeting. It's close, it's largely closed to press. Maybe one day we'll invite y'all on. But it really brings the borough together. You really get to see, we get to see how much similar we all are actually being on the line, you know. So yeah, we're gonna have the Department of City Planning on that. You know, I have not been shy in saying that we need to build housing, and all of my civic leaders know that. Everybody who knows me knows that housing is in my DNA. And we're going to largely work with city planning and with these civic leaders at a different time. We will bring them in to ask them which parts of it can they stomach. So for instance, you know, we got a lot of pushback on the legalization of basement apartments. And it's just ridiculous to me why we're even having this conversation when we already have people renting out their basements here. So we're going to largely work to sort of massage that with leaders. Some other areas, you know, a lot of these neighborhoods are worried about growth. You hear it in the Creedmoor plan as well, where we did a lot to limit the heights. You know, at one point there were proposals for 10 stories and 12 stories and 14-story building. Not that I was personally opposed to that, but we worked and really modified the plan to try to insulate the density into the middle of the site with all of this home ownership on the crevices of the plan, right? So largely, if you're a homeowner that abuts the site, you're going to have home ownership, and we were very sensitive to that. We're talking 6 to 8 story co-ops and condos, and we're still getting pushback on that as we speak. I am not going to be shy. I've told them we're just not going to agree on this conversation on the height on this site. And that's the way we're going to proceed with this plan. And, you know, we're not going to agree on every facet of the plan. I do think that the administration threw too much in. I mean, it wasn't really hard the governor's plan technically telegraphed this plan. And, you know, I couldn't understand why we threw everything in at one time. So we're going to be right back to where we were with the governor's plan. Technically, you know, and we're going to continue to work with our council partners across the Queens delegation to see what parts of it can they stomach. But once again, the ADU conversation, growth along our business corridors are a must. And once again, just as we saw with the state, when everybody was hell-bent over the governor releasing her plan, I said Queens is still going to grow, whether this plan proceeds or not. We still moved ahead with Creedmoor. We're still moving ahead in the Rockaways. We're still moving ahead with Jamaica Avenue. We're still moving along with the Long Island City waterfront rezoning. Even though Western Queens has definitely been better on the conversation around density, we're gonna proceed. We're gonna continue to proceed. On the so yes, we will play a convener as we always do on all of these plans. and try to shape them. And let me say this, Ben, I'm no stranger to this. Remember, I did mandatory inclusionary housing when I chaired the zoning committee in ZQA. I mean, obviously I wasn't the borough president and didn't have oversight over every community board. But it is our hope that we will work together to find consensus where we can. We also will be going to Albany on this ADU conversation as well. On the Queens Forward Plan, without a doubt, a lot of pieces of it are challenging to do in the budget climate we find ourselves in. But I feel relatively good about pieces on the healthcare front. That was one of the largest priorities that we had on the Queens Forward Plan. The governor came down and announced the expansion and the new ER at Jamaica Hospital. That was something we wanted to see done. So we're going to have a brand new emergency room at Jamaica Hospital. The Rockaways continues to be a big priority. She did dispatch her State Department of Health commissioner just a few months ago to tour St. John's Hospital with me. So, you know, we're still waiting on what that price tag looks like and working with the hospital because there has to be particular studies that have to be done in order for us to proceed with a trauma center, because that's something the community sorely needs there. Right now, if you get into an emergency situation in the Rockaways, you have to travel all the way to Jamaica Hospital. Try doing that on the Van Wyck, even if you have lights and sirens. Good luck. You know, it's going to could take you upwards of 50 to nearly an hour to get from the Rockaways with the Van Wyck traffic that we incur coming off of the peninsula. So that piece continues to grow out. She did give us some Queens Forward money, which is going to help us on the economic development piece. And then Creedmoor was like a big one for us on the housing front. So we were very happy to work with ESD to get this done. And once again, Ben, you know, we could have all the proposals in the world. We need money, right? The bus plan, like all of these things were things that we discussed. You know, the conduit task force that we formed, you know, we wanted to see something done there. Is there an opportunity for the state to throw in there? So are we 100% there? No. But she's taken bits and pieces of it and we're moving those pieces. But healthcare still being the most essential part of it. We're working with Elmhurst Hospital. All of our institutions right now working on expansion plans. Once we have those expansion plans, we'll have a price tag next to them as well. So Queens Hospital is working on one. We should have some news, God willing, on that soon. Matter of fact, we're looking to rename their cancer center after Claire Schulman. So the board is working through that minutia. You have Elmhurst coming up with their plan. We're working through St. John's. Mount Sinai, we've done some work with on expansion. We put some capital in. It's only so much that they can grow, but that we've told all of our institutions they should be looking at the growth patterns. And we know that Queens is going to be the borough that grows the most, you know, over the course of the next 2 decades.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Pete. We're going to go back to Andrew, who I know raised his hand, and then we have a couple of written questions. So Andrew, I'll promote you back.
Hey, thank you again. So I have another Willets Point adjacent question. This one is about this sort of thing that's been lingering around the ULERP process since it started, where the Mets and NYCFC and the City Parks Department have been negotiating around using parking around City Field for event days at the new soccer stadium. The approval of Community Board 7 or recommendation of approval was like contingent on them resolving this sort of ongoing negotiation that's been happening since basically the announcement of the plan. Do you have any concerns that hasn't been resolved yet?
I'm speaking to both parties, and it is going to get resolved. So I'm confident that will get resolved by the time we have a shovel in the ground, which ain't going to be to 2027 anyway. And you know, obviously Steve Cohen has his proposal as well for his casino. We'll see what happens with that. And also let me just add that we've asked, and this is part of our negotiations as well, we've asked the city to also conduct a ferry service study, because we can run a ferry to City Field as well. So we need to look at a myriad of strategies. Parking can't be the only one. Even as we talk about the bus redesign, you know, we're talking to them about making sure that there's connectivity here, because you're going to have a lot more activity as this stadium comes online. I'm confident it will be resolved by the time we're ready to go.
So you mentioned Steve Cohen's proposal for the casino. Does that sort of affect your view of Wills Point Phase 2 at all, given that he's obviously been sort of trying to negotiate with the team that's moving into Phase 2 sooner than his casino will come around? And
Well,
also,
listen, I love using leverage. I'm not going to tell Steve Cohen not to use his leverage as well. I mean, obviously, you saw us get the Corona Plaza deal done because they needed the streets demapped. So, I don't knock anyone trying to use their leverage for what they need, what they need to accomplish. But I will leave that to them. But I'm 100% concerned that I'm 100% positive that will be resolved. And then also, one of the things we brought up at the hearing is also they hadn't had any conversation with the U.S. Open as of up to the hearing. So we flagged that, and we wanted those conversations to be had as well.
does the proposal from the City Planning Commission, what do you think of the fact that they're potentially not going to have casinos in the city go through ULURP? I know that's like a very key part of what borough presidents do. So like, how do you view that in relation to obviously people are vying for the downstate licenses, that process? Do you think that that's the right way for that process to go for example, Steve Cohen's proposed casino or even the other ones that are proposed in Queens?
So I will still have a vote, remember, based on the state legislation, for him to achieve, if he was selected, like I would be one of, I think it's 5 or 6 votes, forgot the number. I think it's 5. So I would still have a vote, and my vote will always be contingent on community benefits and outreach, right? So listen, you always want the public to have input, and I think there's no challenge in making sure that, even as, the city proceeds with the proposal that they put on the table, that we have a seat at the table. So and we've already Steve knows how we deal. You've seen Senator Ramos also hold town halls. We're gonna want them to do the very same, no matter who gets it, whether it's, I know resorts most likely will get it. If Steve gets it, the conversation doesn't shift. What are the community benefits? And once again, if it happens, I have a vote on the advisory committee. So more than advisory committee, but amongst the stakeholders. So I can say on the record, like, if there's no outreach done to my liking, like, I'm going to be a no vote. If there are no community benefits, we're not going to sign on to anything that doesn't benefit the surrounding communities. And we're going to want to see those commitments in writing. There's a lot of good in the plan. There's a lot of opportunities for jobs, investments in infrastructure. Those are all good things. Open space, although there is the controversy around, well, should he be able to build there? But the bottom line is, as this proposal snakes its way through, we will still have a vote if it comes down to that.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have a couple of written questions. We'll go to, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong. It's Zarina from QNS. She has 2 written questions. The first one is, are there any additional details on the Queens Boulevard project that Schumer and Gillibrand had allocated $30 million? What section of Queens Boulevard, and what does this project include? I believe this is a press release that I think was supposed to be coming out today.
Yeah.
Announcing federal funding for Queens Boulevard.
I can't speak to that yet. We'll get briefed on that by City DOT. I'm assuming in the days to come, being that they just got the funding, and we've also just done similar, asking for the federal funding for the conduit as well, which the Department of Transportation is also putting in an application. And we've also put money into, I think I put about $3 million into Queens Boulevard as well. Chris, you could probably get those numbers. So I know for us, getting the last phase done was important, but I'm assuming with this $30 million, we can also come up with some other creative design proposals. Like, some of the things we've looked at, for instance, is could we relocate the buses into the middle, rather than on the side? Maybe we give some on-site parking back to the local residents and businesses. So I'm assuming this 30 million, which is a nice tranche of money, which is sorely needed for Queens Boulevard, although there's been a lot of progress, will cover a large range of different strategies that we've been looking to address now. But I could speak for my money, which I know went into phases 2 and 3, I believe, on Queens Boulevard. And that was largely to do bike lane treatments, to do some street treatments, as well to shore up the boulevard a little bit more. So we'll look forward to working with DOT on what their future proposals look like on the federal side and our federal stakeholders.
And their second question was also, how are you handling anti-Semitism in the borough, including the recent anti-Semitic incident at Hillcrest High School?
That's a loaded question. I mean, we've been going back to my time in the city council. We recognize that anti-Semitic attacks were up even going back to 2017, 2018. It's one of the reasons I passed legislation sponsored by then Borough President Mark Levine and Councilmember Chaim Deutsch to create the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes. And then we also took a step forward because ComStat, when we looked on the reporting that the NYPD did, there was no transparency around what hate crimes even looked like. So largely our legislation then pushed the NYPD to put the hate crimes category onto the NYPD's ComStat database. What are we all doing to address hate crimes? I mean, I could say that we don't look at this as these one-off incidents just once a year. It's easy to do rallies. We do rallies, but we also have infrastructure that we put in place here. Helen Marshall, when she was borough president, created something called the Queens General Assembly that brings together Jews, Muslims, Christians, LGBTQ community, African American, Asians, everybody you can think of. We've continued to build out that infrastructure. We just graduated our latest class on the Queens General Assembly last week. And this is about 30 or 40 individuals who sit around a table for months, learning about each other's history, eating each other's food cuisines, really getting to know each other. So that's what helps us break down these silos and address hate. So that is a strategy we continue to do. You heard me talk about the interfaith dinner that we're hosting, which is more than just a dinner. It's more than just about breaking bread, but we're going to have the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes. We're going to have nonprofits at the table as well. The Office to Prevent Hate Crimes as well, you should know, when we created that office, one of the things we pushed for was funding for local CBOs. That was critical because we need to have community-based organizations also a part of this conversation. You're going to see the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes, I think this week, announce their grantees, the people who will receive about $10,000 to really go out into communities. So last night we held town hall with the United Sikhs organization. They're a community-based organization who deals with hate crimes in that community. They're a recipient of that grant. So we really, to address hate, have to have community-based solutions, right? So that starts with your community-based organizations. We created a hate crimes task force when I came in here, because largely when I came in, remember, the Asian community was feeling threatened. They couldn't go outside. They were under attack and felt under attack, felt despair every day. And, we came out and did a lot of work with the CBOs there. Of course, we held probably the largest rally on Asian hate crimes in Queens history, with leaders from all diverse backgrounds coming out. So that task force meets quarterly. If we do see things enhancing, we do meet more regularly. We just, like I said, met last week. We had NYPD around the table. We had Jewish leaders around the table, Muslims, Asians, CBOs, CUNY campuses around the table. To address hate crimes, you have to know that they're happening. A lot of times that we do get we do see a lot of underreporting. I'm very happy that the Jewish community in particular is really reporting, because for a long time, the numbers, we knew it was heightened, but we weren't hearing about it as much because there was underreporting happening. So we're continuing to stress to all communities, we need you to do reporting. Then we need to do the work on the building bridges piece, the task force piece. So those are all strategies we're putting in place as the most diverse county in the world. It's sad that this war has heightened. It's felt like it's almost open season on the Jewish community. For instance, last week we had Hanukkah events that were targeted across the county on a flyer. We work with our law enforcement partners. Thank God it did not, it could have turned out worse. Thank God we were able to stem that. So how do we deal with it? If we hear something, we certainly are working with law enforcement partners. We can talk about Hillcrest High School for a second, where one, the Jewish teacher who was targeted, very proud of our Muslim students from that campus who said, we're going to walk her back into her class, right? We want her back. She must come back. We have the right to freedom of speech, but we don't have a right to violence. The solutions lie in each one of us. There's no, I mean, I wish I could take the hate out of everyone's heart in the world. It's just not possible. So we do that. You know, people will say, why do you, you know, there's sometimes a question, why do you do so many cultural events at Borough Hall? We need to make sure that communities feel seen and heard, and that they know that there's a government accessible to them. They did not feel that always, right? You know, we hold some events here, people like, they cried. They're like, thank you for honoring my people, you know, for allowing us to come into the halls of government. I'll also say the immigrant welcome center we have here. You know, all of these things combined are ways that we really are trying to address anti-Semitism. On Hillcrest campus in particular, the principal is working, and we had recommended this on like a Breaking Bread event with the students where they can share history. And what you heard largely when we held the town hall with the chancellor with the students was they wanted to be educated more in the Middle East. They wanted to be educated on the Holocaust. Different children from different backgrounds. So we have to make sure that we're fostering the dialogue and not stymieing it, because that's what's happened. I will tell you, this has been one of the most challenging times in just holding the borough together, because the division is so stark. I've never felt this since I've been here, where you're just trying to stitch together entire communities that have historically lived next to each other in peace. But once again, it's a lot of work. And I'm just grateful to everybody who's stepping up. I had lunch with the imam last week, and I raised, I was asking him, how are things in his mosque, and he said, we tell people peace, we want peace. And he has friends. He made it very clear. I'm friends with Jewish people. We have to make sure we're all coming together at this moment. So I'm hoping in January, that first big interfaith dinner we host, which will also be a training on how to identify hate crimes. What are the resources there? What are the community-based organizations there? What are they offering? So continuing to do this work, it's ongoing work. And every day, what we do here is to fight against hate.
All right, thanks, Pete. It looks like we have the last question. If anyone else does have one, please feel free to take the time now to raise your hand or write it in. But this comes from Naisha again from the Chronicle, who asks, when does the BP plan on appointing a new CEC 28 member? Is he considering someone who is of a Jewish background? From what I understand, the school group is a predominantly Jewish area, but has never had someone from that background on the CEC.
So we're continuing to address disparities in any way, and we always are gonna, look at the best candidates. We're not gonna select somebody based on just simply race or religion. I really trust my office to look at candidates, and obviously you can't just appoint somebody based on, they're African American or Jewish. The chancellor also has a myriad of rules that we have to follow. For instance, you have to have a child, I believe, in public school. Not saying that there aren't there, but just, there are a myriad of rules that we have to look at and follow as well. So it's just not simply we can just pick somebody based on race, religion. But I trust my office to look at candidates who have applied, because we can't tell people to apply. And then based off of who comes in, they will interview. Everybody has to go through a vetting process, because I remember the article the Chronicle wrote, the first one, which was incorrect. Everybody has to go through a thorough vetting process before they're selected. So the Department of Education legal department has to vet. My lawyers have to vet. My counsel does thorough vetting as well on appointees as well before we can even approve them. And that's for pretty much all of our appointees. Yes, we, once again, do look to see if we identify any things that would be problematic. In the case of the young lady, when she was thoroughly vetted, there was nothing even on her social media that made us question who she was. And a lot of times we will get recommendations. We just don't pluck people out of the sky. Like, there are community stakeholders who may know these individuals as well, or they might have shown that they are doing work in this space. And we also try to give new voices an opportunity to sit in a lot of the appointments that we make, hence the community boards as well. So, we will always select who we believe is the best candidate. We always look to those who've already shown a commitment, because, you could appoint somebody and they may not show up to the meetings, so what is your history in actually showing up to meetings? Have you been committed? Have you done your research? These are all questions we ask on any appointees that we make. So we're going to select the best candidate, and we're not going to do that based on race, religion, or creed. We appoint Jewish people to a lot of, community boards, we're looking to make sure that there's representation everywhere. I think we've led with that. So, but we also are cognizant that we want to make sure that we're selecting the best candidate. So if that person is Jewish and they're the best candidate, they'll be selected. If they're African American, no matter what they are, if they're the best candidate, they will be selected.
All right. Thanks, Pete. And with that, it looks like we have no more questions. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Pete, if you want to say a last word, I'll turn it to you, but I appreciate everybody's time today.
All right. Thank you. Happy New Year. Look forward to the work ahead. It is going to be a banner year for Queens next year, though. I will say that just those key indicators, like I said, on the economy, the rezonings that are coming up are really going to help us to ramp up more housing production, assuming we also get the tools from Albany we need. But we look forward to continuing to fight the fight for this beloved borough, this borough that we love and that we're passionate about seeing moving forward. So I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank my staff also, who does this work day in and day out and building bridges and doing the hard work. Once again, people talk about borough presidents' offices as if they're just advisory. And the other borough presidents and I always talk about this and we laugh, because people might have used the office to do a lot of ceremonial stuff, but this is not a ceremonial office. We pride ourselves on economic development and shaping the borough and working to make sure that we correct historic disparities. These are all the things that we are laser focused on, and we're getting it done. So that being said, thank you all. Have a great holiday season. Hopefully y'all get some rest, but I know y'all got to write. But I'll see you all in the new year, God willing, in person.
All right. Thank you, Ethan. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.